Hi, and welcome everyone to the show. You are listening to The Cyber Riddler, a podcast that talks about offensive and defensive side of the cyber world. I'm your host, Ahmed Murabi. Usually, when there is an incident, or cyber incident, or data leak, companies or organizations will start to panic. And that's when they engage the cybersecurity department. Within the cybersecurity department, there is a small unit called or team called the incident response team. And that team is responsible for collecting data, analyze it, and correlate evidences and events together. And at the end, they build timeline to the incident. And these people are so skillful because they understand every single thing in the operating system and they understand how to collect artifacts to it. So basically, they understand how the computer actually works on the operating system, and they understand every aspect of it. Today we have a guest, and this guest is, I don't know how to describe it, but she's the expert when it comes to information security. She has different backgrounds. She worked in DFIR, digital forensic and incident response, and she also worked as a penetration tester, and she's the CEO of the company Secure. So I want to welcome Paula J to the show. So welcome, Paula.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ahmad. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. Can you please start with introducing yourself? Because I wanted to do an introduction, but I thought like maybe I will not cover everything you've done like the last 15, 18 years. So please, introduce yourself, give us a brief about yourself, and then we'll start doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, I've been in cybersecurity for almost 20 years and I have established Secure, so the cybersecurity consulting company 15 years ago. And always when I think about these years and so on, it sounds like a lot. But this time that I spent in cybersecurity definitely run very fast. And I also got to Secure Academy, which is the educational part of Secure, where we've got over 40 different trainings that we wrote based on as well our experience. And what we do, and that's also what I do, is simply penetration testing, cybersecurity consulting, also from the architecture perspective, but we also do the incident response and forensic, which means that if there is an incident, our customers or future customers contact us and we help them to survive that, but also at the same time learn what happened in order to be better. So that's a little bit about the company. But if it's about myself, I've got pen testing background and I've got also access to the source code of Windows. And well, as simple as this, I'm just a geek with the business role because I have to, because of the company setup. I'm the CEO, but I'm not leaving technology and I do not plan to.
So you're still in the technical side, nevertheless you are running the company.
Yes, it's very challenging because you have to take all the business decisions and at the same time participate in a project. So the regular workday, it's literally never 8 hours.
Okay. Let's start then. So I want to start with giving you like start simple. Let's start simple by understanding what's a DFIR first, and then we can go to much deeper questions. So what is DFIR, or digital forensic and incident response, and why it's so important? Because in the last like 10 years, we started to see this role more engaging in the cybersecurity world. Usually it was like either someone is hacking or someone is defending, and there is no actual name for it. So why it's important in the current days?
Very good question, because first of all, especially in the current times, we have to understand how attacks are delivered in the infrastructure. So we are here talking about a pure technical knowledge, and for that or against that, we are preparing our defense mechanisms, defense solutions. But only that can work effectively if we do understand how the threat is brought inside the organization. So, simply saying, whenever we are thinking about the incident response capability in the organization, That's something that is very often missing. We've got good administrators, we've got guys in the security side that are securing infrastructure. We might even have a SOC team, but the question is, do we know what kind of dots do we connect when the incident happens? And that's basically what we are referring to. And also, according to stats that McAfee collected in their reports, 77% of organizations do not nowadays have a well-written, tested incident response plan, which means that if the incident happens, they don't know what to do. And that's pretty much what we see happening in the organizations that, well, logically have an incident. So when there is an incident, we come to place, they truly don't know what to do. And they literally ask us a question, what to do, which is always very challenging because if you are not familiar with how that infrastructure works, you have to first spend some time to become familiar with the details and then collect the indicators of the compromise, find out the patterns, learn what's the spread of the attack, what kind of levels of access hackers potentially have, what happened in general, what's the business impact. So there's loads of things that we have to learn in order to help the organization. And if they had that kind of a knowledge, then they would be able to obviously respond faster and at the same time maybe even not to allow that incident to happen.
Okay, but so usually when there is an incident, we will go in details on much details on that. But so the challenges coming with an incident responder is, you know, that you are expert when it comes to, for example, understanding the operating system, how it works. But unfortunately, hackers are evolving every day. And when there's an incident, sometimes you're right. We don't know. I'm an incident responder myself. So it's a problem that sometimes you don't know where to start. Is it like a ransomware? Is it like a malware with like a special ability? Is it something like we've seen before, like in the past? But sometimes it will be something completely different. So it's like shooting in the dark. So you didn't know where to start. So what are the challenges when it comes to having an incident and how incident responders are like dealing with it?
I would say the first thing like that I would define as a challenge is in general time. And this is in general something that every incident responder has to deal with. So the faster we respond, the better effect most probably we're gonna get. Of course, it's not always like that, but in most of the cases it is. So you've got a certain timing. It's not really precisely defined, but the faster, the better, within which you need to define, of course, what happened, find the indicators of the compromise, analyze what happened, and so on. And in that shortened time, you need to be assured that the skills that you have currently used are defining the problem correctly. So it's a problem of correctness, yeah, because of course the longer the more appropriate the longer in general, what I'm trying to say is that the longer time you've got in order to deal with the situation, the most accurate you're going to be in terms of defining what happened. Yeah. And there's a certain line that we can draw and say that, okay, that accurateness is good enough. But there might be a situation that if you will not analyze all the, for example, workstations for the patterns properly and so on, then you will not be able to drive conclusions. So it has to be simultaneously decided that once you already gather information about what happened, you've got the indicators of the compromise, you know how to clean things up and so on, then you already start acting. While at the same time, that therefore the team is important, there is someone still working on recognizing the indicators of the compromise, which might be different on a different workstations. Yeah, so we can make some assumptions and adjust our actions to it, but at the same time, the analysis must be going on. So I would say the biggest challenge is to have a skilled team and to set up various tasks that you can run simultaneously, and at the same time put it into the axis of accurateness and time. And obviously, the longer time you spend, the most probably more accurate you're going to be. But there needs to stop somewhere because the company needs to act. So this is in general the biggest challenge. So where do you put the cross? Like you draw the line and you say, this is the moment where we start acting.
Okay, so as you mentioned that if you gather the indicator of compromise or IOCs, sometimes do you like collect them from threat intelligence sources, or you try to collect them within the environment itself, or how you actually define these IOCs?
Yeah, so IOC, for example, it's just something, some kind of an indicator that that's malware. So it might be, for example, that there is some file, maybe somewhere placed in the folder, that if it's there, it means that workstation is compromised. Yeah, so this is a quickly identifiable the IOC. It might be that there is some process running. It might be also that within the process there is a DLL loaded, or it might be, for example, across the Windows client workstations, because on a server prefetch is not enabled by default, that in the prefetch you're going to find an entry that is like that. Or you might see that in the outruns, for example, at the first scanning, you can see that in the profile of the user, there is actually in the registry loaded an entry within run key, yeah, and then that could be some kind of a shortcut that's going to be leading to some place, but it's going to have like a random name. So just the fact that it's there, it's existing, this would technically allow you to scan all of the workstations and list the workstations where that thing has been potentially added, and then you need to also think through and have that planned in advance what would be your information collection mechanism and how, based on what kind of report, you're going to drive some conclusions. So there are many options really, but we could of course dive deeper, and then we could extract the information from even USN journal, but then that takes time. So the indicator of the compromise, to spot it at first, it's something that allows you to take a decision that yes, this workstation is compromised, and it requires further testing.
Okay, but I have a question here. So, because indicator of compromise will be something from like we gathered from either from current events, or we gathered from like threat intelligence sources or open sources, if you may. So, is it like easy for hackers to change these IOCs more rapidly, or they will be requiring a lot of time to change it? Like, for example, there is a malware with a valid signature. The hash is well known. It has a well known hash. So, is it like easy for an attacker to change this easily, or it will require him a lot of time to change it, and that this IOC particular will be obsolete in another engagement?
Sure, it's a good question. So it's pretty much the question, rephrasing it a little bit, like could hacker potentially impact the evidence or the leftovers that she or he leaves while we are performing the attack? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so answer is, well, obviously it's a very famous consultant's answer. It depends. So, well, you could, for example, delete the prefetch, but for the fact that you are deleting the prefetch, that information, it's going to be in the USN journal. If you're going to clean the journal, that information that you are doing that might be somewhere else, because you have a process tracking, or you in general collect, centralize the event log, so you might find some references to it there, and so on. So you can clean up the evidence to the point that someone's going to be able to see that something happened, but they will not be able to connect the dots. And they don't have to be perfect. So hackers don't have to be perfect. But if you would like to clean the evidence, then it's enough to clean these things. Yeah. So question is how we centralize that information. Where do we centralize it? Because if there is some kind of a threat intelligence system, EDR, XDR, and so on, that information goes very fast to the system. But of course, you can stop that transfer. Yes, you can cut off the network communication. But it's about recognizing potentially the situation very fast, so that that evidence, it's not really collected quickly if it's in general collected by this kind of system. So of course it's possible to hide yourself, but not completely. Well, completely too, but it's just not worth the effort. But to the point where someone would not be able to recognize in details what happened. But overall, it's absolutely worth to have EDRs, XDRs, and so on, because of the information they collect, so that you at the end are able to say that, oh, there is this problem, that process has been running on these workstations, instead of just, going to every workstation and searching for the evidence.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great answer, to be honest. So in my last episode and with Lance James, the CEO of Unit 221. So he was talking that in the era of ransomware, I'm going to shift you to ransomware a little bit. So in the era of ransomware, usually the ransomware will be deployed in the last step. So when there is a malware or there is a hacker or attacker per se, who just infiltrated the environment, and he done everything he could in the environment, then in the last stage he will be able to just deploy the ransomware. So usually ransomware will be taking a lot of time to be, so the deployment will be immediately, but the thing is it will take time in to encrypt the files and stuff. So is it easy for people nowadays to detect these kind of things with the ransomware, or what do you think, what is your thought in general about ransomware?
Yeah, so like there's so many situations where the ransomware has been deployed. First of all, at the customer side, at the company side, uh, weeks after the first access has been made. In general, a funky part is that also according to IBM and according to statistics from the FBI crime report, we are learning that the average time that the hackers are spending in infrastructure is approximately 200 days before they are discovered. And that's kind of what we see. Sometimes that action is immediate, so hackers are in, and based on the evidence that we are later on analyzing, we can see that they were not there before, so this was the time when they entered, and yet a couple of hours later, then the encryption starts. But sometimes they are spending in infrastructure like 3 weeks, or that 200 days, or even a
You
year,
mean the
as we
attacker?
saw. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they decide, for example, to hit, because again, it's about information collection, not only about the ransomware, and in general, once of course the ransomware it's happening, then we are detecting it immediately. But it might be that hackers are there to collect as much data as they can, because what matters in this world is not only to get paid by the ransom, but also to get that data and sell it in a dark web. And actually, what we are seeing in the dark web for sale, it's the username and password pairs, and people store in a browser logon data to Facebook, LinkedIn, and things like that. And that goes actually very cheap, but it sells. And what they can do as well, they can sell access to the company for a certain amount of money. They may not be dealing with ransomware, but they may be going here and there and assure their presence, so build some persistence, and then may say that if you're going to pay me, for example, $50,000, then I'm going to give you like confirmed access to that company, and you're going to do what you want. So sometimes we're dealing with that kind of preparation. And when though the ransomware happens, it happens, of course, very fast. But what we learned as well is that ransomware writers also, they do not do it in a way that you are encrypting, the whole file. You're just encrypting the file to the point where you cannot open it. And therefore, that's our experience very often that, for example, only first set of megabytes of the file is encrypted. If you want to recover data from the inside of the file, maybe you will be able to do it, maybe not. It depends on the integrity of solution you use this file within. But in general, it's only the first part. And we've been actually, just to tell you a quick story, we've been dealing with the customer where they've been smashed by ransomware, and they have actually paid €500,000 for the ransom to get the decryptor that wasn't working. So it's of course very oftenly heard case, but the point is that this was the moment when they called us. We came in and they were like, hey, we paid, the decryptor isn't working, so what do we do? And this was actually also the project that I was doing. And basically, we decompiled the decryptor. We tried to understand what this decryptor is about. And it appeared that it's actually ransomware that was badly written, that when it was getting into the data and trying to encrypt, in this case, the first 8 megabytes of each file, in this case, larger files, then because the data was in use, for example, like a database file and so on, so it was in use, ransomware was actually crashing, and it was getting to that file again and again and again. So the
It
files,
crashed?
yes. So
Wow.
it's not always super professional software. It works, yeah. So that's what matters. And the point was that the beginning of the files, it was actually encrypted like 5-6 times. So the decryptor was actually well written and it was supposed to decrypt files. But the problem was that it could not understand that some of the headers of the files were encrypted that many times. So we fixed the decryptor, and eventually the customer was able to decrypt their data.
So you fixed the decryptor from the hackers themselves?
Yeah. That's
Wow.
exactly what happened. It's a funny story. I love it because it also shows that, it's important to look into details.
Yeah, because these people, they for sure their motivation is money, and because they are doing this, they want to grow more customers. And if you have a bad decryptor, it means that you will never get a customer back. So yeah.
Good point. It's reputation for them too. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's for them it's business at the end of the day. It's they are like me and you. We do like 8 to 5. We do like 8 hours. They have their 8 hours of doing of ransoming people.
I wish it was 8 to 5, but totally, their motivation is money. And actually, also according to stats, then you've got approximately 90% of an attacks nowadays that are actually motivated by money. So here we go.
Wow. So if let me give you like a follow-up question to the ransomware. So if like a company or organization get hit by ransomware, do you recommend to pay the ransom, or you recommend to stay a little bit and try to figure out how you can decrypt your files, or what is your thought about this? I know it's controversial, but what is your thought about should we pay? Should we not? Should we wait?
It is definitely controversial because there is obviously a pure statement that we should not pay criminals, and that's what it is. But sometimes companies, they don't have a choice, and we cannot judge them because sometimes it might be that, well, they did not invest into security of their infrastructure properly. Things are smashed. They cannot do their business, and this is really what stops them from continuing. So they're gonna take a risk, they're gonna pay the ransom, and then they're gonna see what happens. Yeah, and in general, like you said previously, hackers are trying to get the better reputation right now, because when we got these statistics that if you're gonna pay, then obviously you will not get the key anyway. Well, there were some stats about that too, and these statistics were not really working on favor for hackers. So people like or companies, they stopped paying. But once we hear the successful stories that someone paid and actually managed to get access to their data, then it's a little bit of a hope for that company. And again, I don't judge them for doing that. And we get a customer like that actually. So they had a ransom to pay $300,000. So it's not that much. They did not have that money because it was a small organization. They said that they can pay a half of it, and that's maximum that they pay, and that's it. A negotiation is over. If they don't agree, then they're not making a deal. And the hackers actually agreed to that, and they provided them ransom or the decryptor that worked, and they managed to recover their data. Well, it's an unpopular story, but it's a story that we need to know that sometimes it is happening, and it's hard to say recommend or not. I would say it's more business decision, but I just want to say that sometimes
Based on the risk appetite.
that pays off. Exactly.
Okay, so because why I'm asking that, because usually these groups have their support. They have like 24-hour support, and you can
Yes.
go to them. And sometimes their customer support is better than at the other businesses because they are responsive and to it. Okay, so if let's go back to normal malware, not from a ransomware perspective. So how we can determine the potential impact of a malware? Should we run it immediately to a sandbox, or we can determine the impact of it without having like a sandbox, or how to do analysis of it?
Okay, so it depends whether the malware is really running in the infrastructure or not, yeah? But if it's not, and we just take a sample and we're lucky enough to collect the sample, while at the same time we've got an infrastructure that hasn't been really touched or not touched much, then of course, we can start the analysis. But the thing about the analysis is that malware, of course, it's very often obfuscated. Sometimes you get a possibility to get into the certain layers of malware, but then the core of it, it's going to be obfuscated, which of course you can try to play around it too, try to run it, dump it from the memory, verify its activity and so on. But in order to see how it works, then you have to have like a separate activity that is actually designed only for that. So it is possible sometimes to make some guesses, yeah? So that's one thing. Second, while the malware is already running, yeah, then, well, to determine the impact, we have to solve the incident first. And what helps with that is, of course, some central monitoring, so CM systems, and anything on the top that was going to give us the overview of how malware was actually running in the infrastructure. And thanks to that, we will be able to determine the impact of malware in terms of how it works, not in terms of what it is.
Okay. So what is from your experience, what are the most common mistakes for people working in the industry do when they do like malware analysis? What are the common mistakes they fall into? Like they click on malwares, they do things. What are the common malware from your experience?
Well, there are many, in general, mistakes in this field. So not only in terms of malware, but also in other activities. So when someone, for example, is a beginner, yeah, then obviously what we should have, it's the environment where we would be able to perform that analysis. So appropriate tools, that environment should be isolated. We call it, by the way, crash and burn. So one of the common mistakes would be not to have an environment like that. Depends how, of course, deep we want to go into this. But in general, when we've got a malware that we are dealing with, some samples, in order to be able to analyze it, it's easy to make a mistake where, for example, by accident, I don't know, your finger is going to double click on something and so on, then obviously
Happened a lot.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. So obviously we should have, and that's why we call it a crash and burn situation, or crash and burn environment, so computer and so on. So we take the malware sample and then we bring it there, and we can do whatever. We can make as many mistakes as we want to, because that environment, it's not affecting anything. So that's one setup. But also one of the biggest challenges in terms of collecting the samples and so on around malware is that companies, sometimes they don't know how to collect the evidence. And the faster they do it, the better chance they got that they're going to have more complete information. And for example, I've seen, this is drastic, yeah, so only over 18 years old. So just imagine that we came to the field and there was another incident response team, and they were installing the evidence collection toolkit, so FTK Imager particularly, on the servers that they were collecting the evidence from. So,
on the
this
server?
is like the worst. On the server, yeah, because FTK has to be installed, but you install it actually in your workstation on the pen drive, copy the files into the pen drive, which is like 2 megabytes, and then you run it from there. But they were actually installing it on the server, so horrible.
So when you install it in the server, you actually overwriting some bits on the operating system, and then you cannot verify the integrity of the disk anymore. And you know how many things can go wrong when, like, maybe there are some important bits will be cleared. So that's a bad idea.
Things.
Yeah.
Very, very bad idea. So when I saw it, I will never forget it, because my heart was bleeding when I actually saw it. Potentially, lots of evidence has been destroyed. The journal has been pushed up and things like that. Oh, just horrible. Plus, they were doing that and they did not collect a memory dump. So memory dump goes first, this dump goes second. That's the rule, but not everybody knows it.
So sometimes the examiner will not pay attention to these details, and he will end up with a very bad evidence, and he will not ensure the integrity of it, or can verify even that evidence is collected in the right manner. Okay, so moving on from malware to memory analysis, since we mentioned memory analysis, when I did the research of this episode, I was checking some videos. I like that, Paula, how you are doing like a series of teaching people how to do memory dumps. I saw a couple of
Thank you.
videos for your in your blog. I think Secure, the
Hmm.
blog. You are doing some video teaching people. So kudos on that.
Thank you.
So moving to memory analysis or memory dump, is it like easy for people to collect memory dumps? And what are the important things to collect when you are running memory? Because you are talking about volatile memory.
Hmm.
So what are the things that you should collect when you do it? Because don't forget, you are in a state of mind, in a state of machine, that you should take evidences in the right manners. Otherwise, everything will be destroyed. So what are the things, your tips?
Yeah, so incident responder or the person who collects the evidence should definitely be well trained because it's a stressful situation for everybody. It's easy to make a mistake. Therefore, that order that I've mentioned, so the memory dump first, the disk dump goes second, it is an important thing to like code in your heart and in your mind because again, anything that we do impacts the memory. Whatever works, it's in the memory, and in the memory we can also find maybe not, but maybe, let's take a chance, some samples of malware that is working, for example, only as a matter of memory injection. For example, there were many examples like this. Stuxnet was like that, but in general, like it's a classic technique that is leveraging the injection into the memory of the process. So therefore, we are not finding any signs of it of that in the disk. And that's why the memory goes first and then disk second goes second. Now, what are the mistakes that people can make? I think that one of the ironic mistakes is not to test the software that you are using. So you are like, oh, okay, how do we make memory dumps? You research for that, we download the software, and then we do it. This is wrong because there are some in generally known software that you can use, but unfortunately, in the certain systems, they can cause a blue screen. And the problem is that it happens randomly, but it has to be well tested because in a certain combinations, then that blue screen is going to be almost assured. So I'm saying that generically that software has to be tested because having a blue screen in the moment while you are collecting the memory dump, this is ironic because you're just losing something that you've been just doing, and that testing tools, even though when there's like a new up-to-date tool that comes to place, that has to be tested with like systems that you might be potentially dealing with as a responder. And this is, I think, the best thing to approach. And one of the biggest mistakes is also not to be ready with the hardware. And ironically, one of the biggest issues that we see in a company that even though we assist them remotely, we say, hey, you need, for example, the drive where you're going to store the memory dump and the disk dump. And they were like, oh, how big it's supposed to be. And we're like, oh, how big is your memory? And they're like, oh, 32 gigs. And the drive this. Oh, so we don't have a drive like that. Oh, no. So the whole collection of the evidence just, poofs. So
It's gone, yeah.
being prepared with hardware and software and having it well tested, this is the key to success.
Okay, so that's good. So the thing is, do you recall any story from your past doing a case on memory analysis or memory dump that lead to a good findings, like maybe some malware in there or some things? Do you recall any stories from your past?
Yeah, actually, many stories. So it depends, of course, how juicy stories we are thinking about. But in general, one of the interesting stories, yeah, pretty much recently, we were responding to our customer. That customer is in the retail environment, in the retail business, very big one, and they had a ransomware. And that particular ransomware, how did we find it out? So let me tell you, because the ransomware did not kickstart. So they had something that was working in the memory of MSI exec, and that thing was actually communicating to the domain with the bad reputation. And this is really the only thing that stopped that. It was their firewall like the global firewall, that recognize that from the workstations there is something, we don't know yet what, who is communicating with the domains, as I mentioned, with the bad reputation. So that's why that connection was not allowed to go through this domain. But that malware / ransomware has been already running. And after analysis of that workstation, we figured, or technically I figured, that there is MSI exec running. And if you go to its memory, then of course there was a bad code injected in the memory, which you can find, for example, even easily by just analyzing the memory the protection bits. And on one of the addresses there was a RWX, which stands for read write execute. And when you save that content of the memory, you drop it, for example, to somewhere. Virus total depends on the setup. We first, of course, analyze it locally, statically, but then you want to know who else knows it, and then it appears to be a ransomware.
Wow. But usually you do usually as a rule of thumb we don't go to the virus total immediately. We just run it, as you mentioned, locally first, and then we go and check on virus total. So what is your methodology, Paula, when it comes to doing memory dumps? And so do you have any pros or tricks or tips about how to conduct memory analysis? Should we immediately just go to volatility and try to different plugins, or what is your methodology? And for people who are listening to us, what is their path for doing this or start doing the memory dumps?
Yeah, so volatility, just for the context, it's a community tool, absolutely great one, that allows you to analyze initially or sometimes in an advanced way, depends what you are looking for, different patterns in the memory dumps. And of course, depends on what we need to do. Sometimes when we look into plugins for volatility, if you want to extend your research, these plugins are not available for the newest edition 3, but they are available for 2.0. Yeah. So sometimes you have to go like a one version backwards in order to be able to use that particular plugin. What I would recommend is to have 2 versions of volatility for the plugins, for the extensions, and so on. So it really depends on what we want to do. To have also the dstorm package installed, to have, depending on the environment, if you work in Windows, Active Python installed, and in the appropriate bits version. And this is kind of like a good package for a start. And Volatility Foundation, they've got a very, very nice help as well. So please go over there and check out also different ways and modules that we can use against the memory dumps, just to get the basic information out, to get used to it. But again, having multiple versions of Python, Volatility, dstorm, Active Python, this is an environment that we want.
Okay, so using volatility for people starting in the instant response or something like good. So it's not something. So it's something you actually recommend for people to use it. But sometimes the problem is different plugins, as you mentioned, because I think I heard, but I didn't check it myself, that there is some plugins that could cause blue screen of death, but I'm not sure about that. So this is the problem when you encounter this using your having your dump, it will definitely ruin your analysis. So I want you, because we are here, I'm checking, we are 38 already. So I want to check, can you tell us a story about your past, about also an incident? Because in here, I also think, because people like you that spend so much time in the industry, you will be having a lot of crazy stories about these things. So I want you to give us like an incident, not a malware, like an incident happened in the past, something you think is good to even tell the tips for it, for our for people who are joining the incident response team, or people who want to start in the security. Can you tell us more with the steps on it, on how you did conduct the analysis, how you carry out the analysis of it?
Sure. So of course the answer here it's very long, because it depends how deep you want to go. First, it's always good to check the recommendations of NIST, and then you've got the incident responders guide, where you've got a very nice described area that we are moving within. Yeah. So, for example, you got a different roles, you've got a different steps. So, which like first we've got obviously the planning and so on. So, different steps that you got in order to approach the incident. Well, we could also share some theory here, but in general, check out of course the NIST part. And over there, I would say the planning is the key. So we have to have a team settled. We have to have the communication worked out, communication channels and everything. Once this is in place and we've indeed experienced some kind of an attack, then one of the most important things is going to be to isolate the sphere, the part of the infrastructure that is under attack, if it is possible. So again, sometimes we're using just the common sense, but if there is a malware, ransomware that's spreading, obviously you don't want to be a perfectionist and say like, oh, first we need to analyze it and then we're going to take a decision what we're going to do next. Obviously not. Business goes first, and therefore we have to contain the incident first and then analyze the rest. So sometimes that order of things changes, depends on which situation we're in. Sometimes we might be already like, it's too late, it's already encrypted and things are not going on. Then of course, one of the things that you will check is what is encrypted, whether someone is still there, what are the connections made, what are the possible signs of an incident, of an attack. So again, it really depends on the situation, but we should not forget that we should not be a perfectionist in our actions. We should use our common sense and very often consult our decisions with business, because we analyzing an incident may not always know what are the company's priorities. Let's say they may not be offline till tomorrow because they have to open the stores. So we have to act fast, even though there's going to be a related risk with that. But for other companies, they might be like, okay, we got a free weekend. Let's do that. Let's put everything down. Like, for example, the Colonial Pipeline that they shut down everything because the ransomware was already there. And it really depends on, of course, the situation. But the general treatment for incident is very well described in NIST, and I would recommend, of course, starting with that. And I will recommend learning how collecting the evidence looks like, and also I would also recommend to learn how, like, internals of the operating systems, how potentially the attacks could be implemented and or planted, and how these attacks could potentially spread, so that we know what to do. Yeah, so knowledge is power. Technically, more we know about the internals of the operating systems, the better conclusions we are able to drive. So again, situation is very, very dynamic.
Okay, so because when you mentioned when they mentioned that the steps, you are right. The steps of or the order of how you do things does matter. So in the ransomware, is it like, because we saw a lot of this is a question till now I'm struggling to find the answer with too, which is the ransomware. When there is a ransomware, should we immediately shut down the machine, or should we just isolate it from the network? Because sometimes people will say maybe we can extract things from the memory, and like maybe there are keys leftover keys in there, and we could just take it from the memory. And sometimes people will be saying, no, just isolate it and get rid of it. Don't worry about the memory. So what is your recommendation about this in case someone found the ransomware in his environment?
So, like me personally, I would always take a chance, because if the ransomware is already like there, encrypted some data and so on, the important thing is to like isolate it so that it does not spread. But it might be the case, rarely, fairly rarely, because we used to deal with ransomware that was using the symmetric encryption, like for example CoinVault and so on. Now it's asymmetric, so the chance that we're gonna find the keys in the memory, it's pretty low, but at least we're gonna know what happened. Yeah, so not taking a chance to extract information from the memory after things are already encrypted and nothing is going on, it's a waste of a chance.
Okay. So I want to thank you, Paula, for being in the show. I
Thank you so
think
much.
we covered everything we have in this episode, and thank you for finding the time and I know your busy schedule, you have a tight schedule, so thank you for for having the time to be in the podcast. And for you guys, thank you for sticking here till the end of this episode. Please give us your questions and share your questions in the comment below, or you can send us directly. We will respond to this. And if there is something for Paula, I'll make sure that she will get these questions as well. And please subscribe to this channel if you don't, and like this episode if you like the episode. And thank you for being here. See you in the next episode. Thank you, Paula.
So much. Thanks.